Stand by just for one moment. I want to go back to Scott McFarland, who's joining us live from outside of that courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Scott.
Yeah, James Comey has just pleaded not guilty here in federal court in Alexandria. They are going to put this case immediately on a slow track. Comey and the prosecutors here are going to waive speedy trial rights. There are a number of complications here, including the fact that classified information might be involved. So we have a not guilty plea as expected, but everything now goes into a slower lane. And I expect we're going to measure this case in a matter of months, not in days or weeks, even though, as Caroline said, we are in the rocket docket, the fastest moving federal court in America, the Eastern District of Virginia. Noting this, Comey's attorney is uniquely high profile. Pat Fitzgerald, who has had a number of high profile defendants, including in this courthouse, is also the former U.S. attorney in Chicago. This is a high octane defense team going against Lindsay Halligan, the U.S. attorney who, oh, by the way, is in her first ever role as a prosecutor.
All right, Scott, before I go back to Caroline, I just want to ask you a question, having covered Capitol Hill and now justice in Washington. These charges of lying to Congress, and they have to do with questions that the former FBI Director James Comey was asked while he was testifying before Congress about authorizing leaks to the press. Now, we know, that there were leaks to the press, but the question, of course, is, did he authorize it? He said he had not. But even if for the 5 years up until the statute of limitations ended, he had not been indicted, it's still kind of a pretty serious charge. And it could, there is a possibility where someone might say, yes, the director of the FBI authorized me to talk to the press. Is that not out of the realm of possibility?
We know there's a nexus, Vlad, of this case into testimony he gave in 2020. We know that in part because the charging document, though thin, alludes to a statement Comey made to Congress. And we know it happened 5 years ago because they ran right up against a deadline, a 5-year statute of limitations to file these charges. As I speak to you, I'm looking through the notes of our reporter in the courtroom, who thankfully has uniquely good handwriting. And we can get more of a readout of what actually happened in court today. James Comey did speak when the charges were read. He said back to the judge, when asked if he understands what's happening here, Comey said, "I do, Your Honor. Thank you very much." And that his defense counsel did, in fact, review the indictment, which is a small document so far, just a page and a half. Very limited detail in the charging document. Looks like we didn't get any more detail of what the U.S. Department of Justice is alleging here. The not guilty plea has been entered. James Comey, just as expected, as he said in his social media video a few days ago, has requested a jury trial. The charges have been formally read, and on brand for this courthouse, Vlad, as Caroline alluded to, they move fast. This thing started early. They began the arraignment 5 minutes before it was scheduled.
All right, Scott McFarland for us with the breaking news. If you're just joining us, former FBI Director James Comey has just pleaded not guilty to charges of lying to Congress. We are obviously going to continue to monitor what is happening there in Alexandria, Virginia, including if the former FBI director decides to step to the camera and make a statement, or even if he posts one later on his social media feed, which he is known to do. Let's go back to CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi. So, Caroline, you just heard Comey has pleaded not guilty. But my question to Scott, that you could sort of add color to, is this charge of lying to Congress, which has to do with whether or not James Comey authorized leaks to the press. Even if it is thin, even if the charging documents don't have a lot of weight to them, he could potentially, there could be something that comes out that finds him guilty. But the question is, of course, if they hadn't found anything up until now, do we expect that to happen?
Yeah, I think that Scott just broke some big news there, which is that there is going to be classified information involved in this prosecution, which will slow things down quite a bit when you deal with those types of issues. It can take some time because, again, it's highly classified information. So you need protective orders and things of that nature. Now, regarding the strength of the evidence, there has been, and as Scott noted, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia was just placed in an interim position as an acting United States Attorney, Lindsay Halligan. This was her first ever criminal indictment. And the way in which she was appointed, is quite extraordinary. Eric Seibert was pushed out of that position. And I would think that the defense would be making dispositive motions based on that and the statute of limitations. As we know, it's an easy case, but it's sort of convoluted in that it charges conduct based on 2020 testimony that then refers back to 2017 testimony. And you're right, it is in regards to the potential of these leaks of validation and signing off on these leaks. But we'll see what the government has. I think that's a lot of new news. If they do
all right,
have
Caroline, stand by just one moment. This is a very fluid, obviously breaking news situation. So let's go back to Scott McFarland, who's joining us from outside of the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Scott, what do you got?
Oh, you're going to love this. We have a system where different people are running out updates as this proceeding goes along. We have more information now. The prosecution was arguing that this is a complicated case that requires more time. And the judge here, Michael Nachmanoff, a Biden appointee from a few years ago, expressed some skepticism that this two-count indictment, which is just a page and a half, is a sufficiently complicated case right now to warrant such a slowdown in the proceedings. So we already have our first bit of skepticism from the judge in a case that has drawn a bit of skepticism from nonpartisan legal analysts who've said this is untraditional how this has played out so far. The initial trial date has been set, or at least it's been talked about as January 12th. I would not write that in permanent ink. Federal trial dates tend to be very slippery at best. And in this case, you see the possibility, if not the likelihood, of motions to dismiss, potentially a superseding indictment, more information to be released. I would think that a trial date that ambitious is just that, an ambitious thing to put on the calendar for now.
Wow, that is some very, very interesting color there from Scott McFarland. Let's bring in Caroline Polisi just to add her thoughts on what Scott just broke for us here at CBS News 24/7. Caroline, what do you think about what the prosecution was asking for and the judge's response?
Not surprising. Nachmanoff is a pragmatist. And again, it is standard practice in this jurisdiction to move quickly. I do think there will be a lot of snags. I wouldn't count on that January date staying firm, particularly in this discovery process. There's a lot.
Go ahead, Caroline.
There's a lot that is publicly known about this case, and the reason that the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, who was previously in that position, declined to prosecute that case is that it's been run up and down the flagpole quite a few times. He reviewed the evidence in the case and decided not to prosecute, and that's why he was, among other things, that's why he was pushed out. There was also, remember, a special counsel investigation into John Durham that reviewed the evidence in this case and decided not to move forward. There wouldn't be enough evidence to obtain a conviction if there was a prosecution. And specifically, that has to do with different witnesses' testimony. But there's a very fulsome review of what actually transpired here. So, the additional curveball of the classified information could slow things down a bit. But already we're seeing this pushback from the judge. I think that's a pretty strong indication that he won't really tolerate many antics from the prosecution in this case.
We start with former FBI Director James Comey pleading not guilty in federal court today. A short time ago, Comey appeared before a federal judge facing a two-count indictment for obstruction charges and lying to Congress. Comey was indicted last month, just days after President Donald Trump urged Attorney General Pam Bondi to do so in a social media post. Now, back in 2016, Comey ordered a probe into the Trump campaign's connections to Russia. He then became an outspoken critic of the president, that's President Trump, after Trump fired him 8 years ago. Now, Comey also denied authorizing leaked information to the press during a Senate testimony in 2020. Today, his attorney did not ask the court for a speedy trial. A trial date was tentatively set for January 5th of 2026. And we have team coverage of today's hearing, and standing by to help us break down the case right now is CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi and CBS News justice correspondent Scott McFarland is live outside federal court in Alexandria, Virginia. And Scott, we are going to start with you. Thank you for your time today. Can you take us through today's arraignment?
It was a brief hearing, but a momentous hearing nonetheless. I mean, you had a former FBI director facing a judge now a federal criminal defendant, pleading not guilty to 2 federal charges. There were some matters of scheduling that took place during this arraignment. They put a trial date on the calendar for January 5th, 2026, but that trial date is as slippery as it gets. In part because the prosecution argued today this is a complicated case, which could involve a review of classified information. James Comey doesn't have a security clearance anymore, nor does his defense attorney. That's going to take some time. But we also heard from the judge here, Michael Nachmanoff, a 2021 appointee to the federal court here in Alexandria, Virginia, expressing skepticism. This is such a complicated case because the Department of Justice has not presented a complicated case. It's a 1.5-page charging document with very little detail. So we'll see what the prosecutors have to provide in the coming days and weeks to get this thing to slow down, if they want the case to slow down. One other takeaway from the calendar that's important here. The defense says they're going to be filing their motion to dismiss this case, alleging it's a vindictive prosecution, and they're going to do so by October 20th in relatively short order. They also say they're going to file a motion to disqualify or seek the judge to disqualify the prosecutor in this case, who was just appointed, the new U.S. attorney here, Lindsay Halligan, appointed by the Trump administration after the prior U.S. attorney wouldn't bring this case forward and was ousted. You have a lot of moving parts here, but the theater we expected outside didn't happen. There was talk and reporting earlier from CBS News that there was an effort to get a perp walk, one of those photographed walks of a defendant into this courthouse for James Comey. That did not happen this morning. He was given a private, secure entrance out of the view of cameras.
And Scott, I know there's still a lot of developments in this case, and obviously that date of January 5th, that's a tentative date. But any surprises here that Comey's lawyer did not ask for a speedy trial?
No surprises that everybody involved here wants at least a pause until things become more clear. The defense clearly wants to file some motions to get this case absolutely kicked, just off the docket, off the shelf altogether. And the prosecution has given every indication there's more they want to add in this case. It's such a bare-bones charging document. So little is actually alleged in here. We don't know specifically the false statement James Comey is accused of making. So they may need time to further inform the court. And, oh, by the way, there's a staffing issue here. The U.S. attorney herself, in her first ever role as a prosecutor, is the one in the courtroom arguing this case. That is untraditional for a federal prosecutor, a lead federal prosecutor, to be the only prosecutor on a case. And she just brought in a couple out-of-state federal attorneys to help her, an indication there were fewer available in her own office willing to join her in this controversial case.
All right, Scott McFarlane live for us today. Thank you so much for your time. Now let's turn to CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi. Caroline, thank you for joining us. What is the prosecution facing when it actually comes to proving this case?
Yeah, so they've charged Comey with 2 felony counts, one of making false statements to Congress and a second stemming from that false statement of obstruction of a congressional proceeding. The indictment is pretty thin, so I would expect a lot of pushback from the defense about, it's called a bill of particulars, essentially putting the prosecution to their burden of stating specifically what was said that was a lie and how it was misleading and how he sort of knew that it was misleading. So one of the requirements of proving a false statement is not only that it was false, but that it was intended to mislead. And, the underlying facts here are a little bit murky. The wording is a little bit murky. Remember, it stems from congressional testimony he gave in 2020, referring back to testimony he gave in 2017, and him saying that he stood by that testimony regarding his non-authorization of leaks, essentially. So it may be an uphill battle given all the quirks of this case. That being said, traditionally, these charges are pretty simplistic, which is what the judge noted, which is why we are off to the races in terms of setting a trial date and getting things moving here quickly in the Eastern District of Virginia.
And Caroline, what does this case mean for the DOJ? Critics out there, they've mentioned that it seems like the president is using the Justice Department to go after his enemies. We've actually heard the president talk about James Comey and how he is a bad cop. So he's very vocal about how he does not like Comey. So what exactly does this say?
Yeah, he's vocal about his DOJ, which he refers to as his DOJ, going after his enemies, including people like Adam Schiff, Letitia James, for what he sees as retribution. And, part of the evidence, I would assume, in the Comey case will be them making a motion for selective and vindictive prosecution, which includes tweets like the one he made, calling out Pam Bondi by name. Pam, we need to start getting these individuals, prosecuting these individuals. So that certainly will be a piece of evidence in this case. President Trump is breaking a lot of norms. There's no law against his telling his DOJ what to pursue, but if it crosses a specific line into selective and/or vindictive prosecution, that could really hurt him in this case.
All right, Caroline Polisi, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We begin with former FBI Director James Comey pleading not guilty in federal court today. Comey appeared before a federal judge facing a 2-count indictment for obstruction charges and lying to Congress. Now, Comey was given a secure escort to the courtroom, but our cameras caught this just minutes ago. His wife and daughter seen leaving the proceedings, but they did not speak to reporters. Now, Comey was indicted on 2 charges last month, just days after President Donald Trump urged Attorney General Pam Bondi to do so in a social media post. Today, his attorney did not ask the court for a speedy trial. A trial date was tentatively set for January 5th of 2026. We're joined now by CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Sganga. Nicole, thank you for joining us today. What does this case mean for the DOJ going forward?
I think this case puts the Department of Justice and the independence of the Department of Justice on trial. Critics, including former DOJ officials from really both sides of the aisle, say that this indictment marks the starkest example of the Trump administration and President Trump using the Department of Justice to go after perceived political enemies. And career prosecutors reportedly opposed bringing these charges. Ultimately, the grand jury did hand down 2 federal counts. But for the Department of Justice here, the stakes are really enormous. The department's reputation, of course, is on the line as an apolitical institution, a reputation that has remained pretty consistent, at least since Watergate here. And if this case falters or appears to be politically motivated, it could further erode public trust in the Department of Justice. In short, this isn't just a case about the former FBI director. It's also about whether or not the Department of Justice still operates under rule of law or political command by the West Wing.
Yeah, a lot of implications with this one. Nicole, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And now let's bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. Katrina, good to see you today. Does this prosecution have a difficult case to prove here?
They absolutely do. False statement cases are tricky because there's a lot of layers. They have to both prove that James Comey made a false statement, that he intended to make a false statement, and that he knew it was misleading as well. There's also that obstruction of justice charge against him. And the prosecution has to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Something interesting that we learned today is even James Comey still doesn't know a lot of the details of this indictment. He doesn't know the specifics of the counts. He doesn't know who the people referred to in them are. All he knows is that it says he was authorized someone to leak information, but not beyond that. So he is still learning about the details of this case. And the prosecution is really going to have a challenge here. It's also worth noting that Lindsay Halligan, who is leading this, has never prosecuted a case. She's a former defense attorney of President Trump, but she was just installed in her role a few days before this indictment was brought. We also shouldn't forget that when she went to the grand jury, there was another false statement count that they decided not to indict James Comey on.
And just real quick for you, Katrina, you talked about Lindsay Halligan earlier, and we're learning that obviously she had to bring in other attorneys from a completely different branch to help out with this case. Is that significant in your opinion?
I mean, that is absolutely significant. She was put in this role because the former person in that role didn't want to bring these charges against James Comey. There have been previous investigations into Comey where charges were declined to be brought. And even when she joined the office, prosecutors, it's been reported, gave her a memo where they said that they didn't believe that these charges should be brought against Comey. People have resigned from the office, including Comey's own son-in-law, since all of this took place. And she then had to bring in 2 prosecutors from North Carolina to help her with this. So it's highly unusual, and this is just going to be a very interesting and unusual case to watch proceed. Very high profile.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see how it plays out. Katrina Kaufman, thank you.